Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to our April monthly webinar. Today we'll be talking about the diamond of the season, which is the July or 14 July deadline. And with us today we have our support manager. We're hoping that you'll gain a lot. I'm gonna pass it over to you,
I
Barend.
thought that Barend was the diamond of the season.
He is,
Oh,
along with the the deadline, they just all lumped it together. If he was the diamond, the deadline is the crown.
thank you kindly. Just having some classic technical issues here. What? Um, Usual story, yeah. So today, can this thing stop jumping around, please? Thank you. All right. First things first. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
With the overwhelming yeses, I guess I'll get started. Right. So I'm Barend here at GTconsult. I'm the recently promoted delivery manager. I used to be support manager. And I'll be taking you through 2026 out with the SharePoint Classic. This has been a topic that's been touched on quite a bit recently with Microsoft's announcements for 2026, and boy, have they decided to make some changes. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this agenda today is the key deadlines of the classic stuff and what is to be expected and what may have already occurred. Two, what already broke. So if you in this webinar today and things took a turn for the worst randomly after April and so on, maybe it's good timing for you. Three, we'll cover the costs of staying on your old solutions versus upgrading to a more modern option. Migration options, which are your paths that you can follow, the expected realistic timelines and steps you can take to migrate to a more modern situation. And then we'll tie things off with a nice little Q&A for anyone that has any questions. Even though it's Q&A at the end, feel free to raise your hand. If I see it, I'll pause for a second. I'm limited on screen space. But yeah, starting with the deadlines. The key deadlines is notably one of them is July 14. Microsoft is cutting ties with all support for your on-prem solutions of 2016 and 2019. What this basically means is there will be no more support, no more patches, no more security fixes, nothing. Microsoft are just going to show you the door if you try and ask them for help on your older solutions. This obviously generates a huge business risk from a security perspective, a compliance perspective, and is not any situation that any workplace would want to find themselves in. Basically, with no support being presented anymore for 2016 and 2019, this means that should anything in your environment stop working, you won't be able to just conveniently log a call with Microsoft. You would have to escalate it to a SharePoint service provider such as ourselves if you want to get anything resolved further. There would be no more patches. So if you have a compliance aspect to your business and you need to maintain a certain level of compliance and confidence from a security perspective, this will throw you out the window completely, and your compliance will turn around and tell you to go and upgrade your SharePoint or disconnect it from the environment, because this will mean you'll breach your compliance levels. And then not to mention security fixes that usually come with patches, which means that should there be tomorrow be a new hacker event where they decided they've found a workaround for SharePoint 2019's email server and they're able to get into it and then access your SQL data from there due to some weird changes that glitched, you will not get a patch afterwards. You will remain on what you are, and that workaround will forever work in your environment unless you upgrade away from the two. So, with that being said, we find ourselves in a situation that hopefully you have started tackling, or at least thought about tackling, is you'll very likely find from around the 1st of April, 2nd of April, you might have started noticing some weird issues with your SharePoint Online space. You might have some weird feature disruptions, or sites not loading correctly, or just straight out failures. Because from April, or basically the start of April, not even just April 2, but I suppose that was the first Monday, you've got classic functionality, classic sites, workflows, functionality like web parts, all that kind of stuff has been defunct and is being degraded. CSP got introduced or enforced, should I say rather. It's always been there, but as like a more of a highlight feature, it's now been enforced. So if you have custom coding and on your web parts and stuff like that, and they don't comply with the current modern day syntax equivalents or TLS or function calls, your website functionality starts breaking. So anything, for example, that relies on a search web part or a script editor, that just starts failing. You'll notice your app stop loading. Like for example, if you built for your company, for example, for your entity, you've built a incident tracker that works off of a modern script editor, you'll suddenly realize that all of a sudden your incident tracker is no longer loading. It's either giving you errors or it's just failing to populate the page. And once you inspect that page, you'll very likely see that it's being blocked by CSP. It would very much highlight it in a big red letters saying, this violates CSP, need to do a whitelist or whatever that looks like. Early warning signs at this point will probably not be so early anymore, but if you're one of the few that haven't yet been affected by the classic depreciation, because I believe it is a rolled out functionality that's busy cutting ties, so it is happening. So this is your early warning that once you start realizing there's errors like pages stop working or web parts stop loading, maybe even perhaps a performance issue. For example, you have a classic site that you migrated over from your old environment, but you never modernized it. Perhaps that site stops loading or starts failing to load or just slows down entirely. You should reach out to us and we can help you out with that. We can have an investigation and have a look. And perhaps it's one of the few things that we've mentioned now that's actually affecting your environment and you weren't aware of it. But in any case, treat this as your early warning to give us a call. Now, with regards to the risks, if you've looked at SharePoint and you go, my 2013 environment's working fine, I don't need to change it, Microsoft won't break anything and it's never going to break, you're not looking at the bigger picture of the risks involved on staying on Classic. What it basically derives to is there's a security vulnerability across the board because your SharePoint environment is likely on the network, which means it has access to some degree to the outside, even if it's proxied or firewalled or blocked down. There's people always find means and ways, unless you remain in a fully up-to-date compliant state with security fixes, security patches, all that kind of stuff, which will only be available going forward if you have an on-premise solution on subscription edition. There will no longer be vulnerability patches. There will no longer be updates or anything of that nature provided to on-premise solutions if they're not on the very least subscription edition. On top of that, you lose your Microsoft provided support to your on-premise environments. They will tell you that it's unfortunately no longer supported. And even if they do support, it'll be treated as a ad hoc out of service rate. So if by some miracle they do have some expertise in that area still available in the help desk, they would very likely charge you a hefty sum just to even look at it but with no guarantee of a fix. So your only practical solution forward is to get yourself onto a supported platform. The productivity loss from people not being able to do basic functionality that's streamlined in the online space, or systems slowing down or failing, you're not getting that fix nice and quickly that you would have in the past because you just reach out to one of us, or you reach out to your SharePoint support, whoever that may be, whether it's your in-house IT resources or external resources. They start becoming limited to where they can go when they run into issues that generally would get escalated to Microsoft. And then while your services are hindered, down, or broken, everything that relied on SharePoint now comes to a halt. Suddenly your business is standing still. And then integration failures. So if you have the likes of PaySpace or Zeno or Xerox or whoever you use in your business for accounts, finance, leave, HR matters, whatever you may look at doing, CRM integrations, all of those software functionalities are constantly improving, developing, updating. And just like Microsoft, they get rid of the old and focus on the new. So you might think, oh, I got an opportunity to improve my accounts department by giving them software that can integrate to our SharePoint databases, get all the information on the staff, get all the information on our financial documents and the like, and it can automatically pull it into it. It can use internal AI to digest the data and give you instant information, or it can help you track everything. Now you lose out on that functionality and your staff are forced to do it the old, slow, manual way just because you refuse to move on to the next stage of life of SharePoint. So there's a lot of things to consider if you want to stay on, for example, SharePoint 2013, which has already been phased out, or if you want to stay on 2016 or 2019 because you think it's working now, you're hurting yourself in the future. Now, when I say there's costs involved for staying on Classic, there's obviously the loss of functionality and the lack of support and all the like. But then there's also the hidden costs, which are the costs that you don't generally see. You might not feel it at first, but over time you might find things are adding up and you're not sure where those costs are going. Well, looking at staying on Classic, you've got increased maintenance. So you need IT resources that can actually work on the issues. You need infrastructure that supports the old. You need to ensure your servers stay functional, which means very specialized experience and knowledge to keep older technology alive. And you need to be extra careful with how you maintain and manage those servers because you're no longer privy to security patches and fixes. So you need to ensure that those servers remain as encrypted as possible, go as far as cutting off internet if you need to, keep it within your internal confines and have it as an intranet, sure. But again, it doesn't guarantee your safety and security on that environment. Downtime impact. Should something go wrong on the servers? Should it fail? Should the app stop working? Should anything basically fall apart in that environment? You no longer have Microsoft support. So the only way you can turn to is your IT. If your IT lack the skills, the only space you can turn to then is your SharePoint specialists, for example, ourselves, GTconsult. Give us a call and we'll troubleshoot, investigate, and even if we get to a limit where we've got, okay, it looks like your actual SharePoint instance is corrupt or the database blew or whatever that might look like. There's no convenient, hey, Microsoft, can you fix this? You will have none of that. It will be oh, your SharePoint config database corrupted. We have to rebuild you now. But now you're caught in a situation where nothing you had will work on the current and the new. And now you've caught yourself in a situation where you need to now upgrade and rebuild. And you did not prepare for it in the least. And it's not a quick, cheap, and easy exercise to just do on a whim. So I do suggest you at the very least start approaching the subject. If you were on the fence, or if you were one of those that felt, yeah, it works fine, I'm going to leave it as is, let this be the catalyst that starts making you think, maybe I shouldn't just leave it just because it's working. You'll end up with user frustration, which, let's face it, any help desk does not want to deal with. There's people getting upset, frustrated, angry because things are breaking or slowing down or not functioning as intended. But on the other side, there's nothing you can really do about it. You keep throwing more resources at the server, you keep archiving data, you keep Googling little fixes and changes that you could make, but even those are going to hit a limit. Then you're going to sit with increasingly agitated staff trying to use the systems to do their day-to-day, and it's just not working. So every day you start getting flooded with more and more tickets, more and more users, more and more end user frustration, more and more IT infrastructure frustration, and it just snowballs from there. And then last, and probably the most important, considering the context of the entity as a whole, your business as a whole, is your compliancy factors. You will always fail system audits on your SharePoint environment, and you'll always violate regulations because you're in a position that you cannot bring yourself to the level that you need to be. You cannot update to the level that you need to be, and you can no longer upgrade or patch that little compliancy issue that was flagged because you're on an unsafe version, because there are no more patches for you. So now, not only do you have the pressure of ensuring that your system and your environment is up to date and stable and safe and as secure as it can be, but you've also got compliance now on your back, essentially telling you solve this or get rid of it. That is extra stress that no one needs. That is extra stress that no one ever wants. And if certain parts of your company's protocol is to have a compliancy level of X, and you no longer reach that, that could limit the services you can even offer as an entity. So now you start affecting your income, your profitability, your day-to-day business. So the costs just keep compounding. And as I said, you might not feel it immediately, but if you start breaking down each little segment into smaller segments and look at it as a whole, start to realize that this could go from we'll worry about it later, to millions of loss for the business if it's not dealt with in a timely fashion. That's just food for thought. Now, in saying, you've got, now you look at it and you go, okay, cool. I'm now on 2013. I need to be on subscription edition, or I need to be compliant at the very least. Where do I go? What do I do? Well, you've got two options to you, not three. That's just me and my typos carrying on. It's not a reflection of what I do. Luckily, I didn't go into spelling. So two paths forward. You've got SharePoint Online, and you've got SharePoint Subscription Edition. The key takeaways from both is something you need to now consider as to what works.
No.
I thought it was
Okay, I
just
wasn't.
me.
Yeah, I
I
was
thought it
also
was
like,
me.
is it me? Barend. Okay, I'll message him on the side.
I was in that restart my machine now. I like how he freezes with his like fingers together, like he's a villain.
Well, while we wait for Barend to get back, does anyone have any questions?
Good question.
Well, I think my question would be with this deadline like being the 14th of July, and right now it's the 14th of April. Is that enough time for people like to get stuff migrated? Like, will they be able to successfully do it in time before this deadline?
So that is a yes and no answer. So it's very dependent on your environment, the complexity and the size of your environment. If you are on SharePoint 2019, you are way better off than most because it's a simple one-step jump, and you'll be able to do that migration fairly quickly. If you are on SharePoint 2016, however, there is no path straight to SharePoint Subscription Edition unless you use a wonderful migration agent like ShareGate, and you create an entirely new farm, and then you migrate the data into basically a new farm. So it's not so much as an upgrade as it would be just migrating to new servers.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yes, so it can be done in most instances, but yeah, depending on the size of your environment, if you've got an old 2016 environment and you're still using classic pages, especially, there's going to be a lot more work. You're going to want to start ASAP, but don't just dive in and start doing it. Like, make sure you plan it out first.
Gotcha.
You don't want to be. Hey, welcome back.
Sorry, my computer literally exploded. Sorry, my computer didn't even blue screen. It just black screened and said that I am now.
Your webinar's over.
Yeah, no, it decided for me that my webinar is now done. Sorry about that. Gas technology, you know. So for your options, for your migrations, you've got two realistic options. You've got SharePoint Online and you've got SharePoint Subscription Edition. Now, SharePoint Online is the most common, the most picked up, and the easiest to work with because one, it's always up to date. Microsoft continues to keep it that way, and there's no patching for you to do whatsoever. There's lower infrastructure costs because you no longer have to host anything. You no longer need Windows servers. You no longer need SQL infrastructure. You don't have to worry about backup management anymore, as all of this gets handled within Microsoft themselves. There are tools to still do your own backups if you want to back up your SharePoint for whatever reason, but it's no longer a must or a requirement from your end. As Microsoft, you can just request a restore, although it's usually limited to a whole restore, not a specific restore. So either restore the whole tenant back an hour or two or whatever that looks like, or nothing really. And it's ideal for most organizations. It just doesn't naturally work for organizations that have a strict data must be kept on site policy. But then there comes Server Edition, which is your subscription edition or Server Subscription Edition. They keep changing the name. That's the advantages is you as an entity have full control of the data, the security, the compliance, the service setup, everything, because you are hosting it yourself and you're choosing to host it. What that does mean, however, is you need a team that can manage that infrastructure. You need a team that can make sure the servers are running, the data is up to date, the security is patched full, it's compliant, all those little factors that tie in together with it. So as much as it gives you full control, you take on all of the responsibility. There's continuous updates. So in other words, you'll continuously have patches to apply that come out every month. You've got security updates for the edge cases where a recent fix may have created a vulnerability. But at the very least, you will no longer have the bouncing 2013, then 2016, then 2019. They've decided to consolidate it all into one subscription edition, so at least it simplifies the process. The downside is, however, the other side is you've got to ensure your Windows versions are up to date, your SQL versions are compliant and up to date. You've got to make sure you do your patching. You've got to make sure you've got backups set up unless you enjoy rebuilding your solution every time it breaks. So it's all these little bits. And subscription edition, I would say, is best for environments that have to have data governed and restricted to on-prem and cannot have servers hosted. Otherwise, I would honestly root for the online version of it all. The biggest benefit to choosing online means that the only thing you need to worry about is how you want it to look, feel, work, what you need it to do, and integrate and combine. But you don't need an infrastructure team to manage servers. You don't need to pay for licensing. You don't need to cover the costs of SQL storage. You don't have to worry about backups and backup software and expertise to maintain your SQL databases, maintain your SharePoint infrastructure. You don't have to worry about setting up VPNs to get staff access to your SharePoint when they're not on site. And you don't have to worry about ensuring it's secure and set up in your internal environment. You just got to go, hey, Microsoft, I want SharePoint. You sign up with Office 365, and they manage all of that stuff for you. Migration timelines. So migrations are often incredibly underestimated and incredibly underspec. Most people view migrations as I'm going to take this, copy it, and I'm going to plop it there, hunky-dory. And if you attended my previous webinar touching on migrations, if you haven't, you really should go check it out. It does break it down in a bit more detail for you, but it's not just, I'm going to pick it up here and I'm going to put it down there. If that is your mindset to a SharePoint migration, you're already losing. You're fighting a losing battle. And yes, you're going to copy your data across. Is it all going to be there? Probably not. Is your permissions going to be there? Probably not. Is your structure going to be there? Probably not. And now you're sitting there with best case 50 users, worst case thousands of users, looking at you wondering why they can no longer work and access their data when you thought it was just going to be a quick little copy paste. But no, it's much more involved than that. But to just cover it on a high level perspective, the recommended approach would be assess, plan, pilot, then migrate, then post-migration support. Do not just blindly do everything you want to do. Set up a plan. The assessment portion to the migration is incredibly valuable because this will highlight everything that you have in your environment, which then automatically highlights things you could potentially delete, things you could remove, things you might want to keep. And the most important part of all is if you are migrating from your current SharePoint environment, and I'm assuming it's classic due to the fact that you're moving to online, means it'll also highlight everything that will not work once you move SharePoint online. You might think, oh, all this stuff just works on 2013. Surely I can just pop it online and just carry on. No, that's also a big no. With SharePoint Online, there have always been limitations and restrictions to adhere to in terms of character length, naming conventions, special characters, and the like. But now you've got that extra layer where you need to now see from your source, from your SharePoint 2013, 16, 19, what workflows are running that are SharePoint 2010, 2013 workflows. Those will not work at all anymore. Your classic functionality, like web parts that rely on classic functionality, those will no longer work. Custom solutions that were built specifically for your SharePoint 2013 or 19 environment, that won't work, as it needs to be rebuilt into its modernized equivalent. And just highlight everything that's critical to ensuring a smooth, painless process when you get to the end of your migration. Just for some rough timelines. So these are like a generalistic timeline, and it's based off of a standard one-to-one, push the data, build a couple sites, put them in there. Boop. It's not encompassing to a T if you have a ton of custom functionality, or if you have a ton of work that needs to be done to rebuild into online. But just a rough average is, if you're under 50 users and under 500 gigs, you're looking at a couple weeks. That should get you from where you were to where you want it to be, regardless of whether there might be a few small gig lists left or not, or if it's complete. Great. Medium, 50 to 300 users, 500 gigs to about 5 terabytes. It's a couple months. You're looking at 1 to 3 months, depending on the complexity, obviously. And then your large scale, 300 plus users, 5 terabytes and more, 3 to 6 months minimum. And then from there it climbs. Because just to quickly touch on some of, like, a high level overview of why I say months and weeks and not just a week and you're done, just because there's a lot of factors involved. Like I briefly mentioned, classic functionality needs to be rebuilt. Workflows need to be built into Power Automate if you had any on your on-prem. Logic apps rebuilt, functionality rebuilt, visually theming, your custom home pages on your on-premise situation, that will need to be catered for and rebuilt into online. All your data that's been needed to be cleaned once you've identified it and highlighted exactly what it is, look at what it's made up of. And then B, everything that needed to move, you've now moved, but it is only as fast as your internet connection allows to get it to online. So if you're migrating from on-premise to online, you're pushing data into the internet, which means the faster your internet connection to your SharePoint servers, the faster it's going to upload all the data. If you have a slower connection, it's going to obviously take longer to transfer the data. Fortunately, while transferring data, there are some things that can be done in between as part of the prep, but for the majority, the migration will very likely only happen as the last step. In any case, once your sites and stuff's been rebuilt so that the data knows where to go, keep your permissions, keep everything in check. So that's just a quick little high level why I say weeks, months, and it's not just I woke up today and tomorrow I'm on a new SharePoint environment. So you should 100% start planning now already. Now, the key steps for a successful migration, if you're planning on moving off of where you are now to online, you're going to have the assessment. Like I mentioned, we audit everything, you get an inventory, you identify all the risks that need to be done. Your planning will define your scope, your timelines, assign your resources and ownership. Pilot will be to a test, so migrate a test environment, validate your tools and approach, make sure everything is hunky-dory. You've got access to the old and the new, you've got everything you need to get started. then the actual migration of the data. And while that's continuing, staff can continue to work and everything carry on. The day before completion, we'll just sync the last bit over. And then validation, spot checks, UAT testing, verifying data integrity, look at the reports for the migration, make sure everything went well, and then hand over to the customer. Our suggestions or recommendations, more than suggestions, if I use the word suggest, it's more of I implore you to start now. Don't wait for July 14 to start thinking about moving to online. If you're waiting for July 14th, you've already potentially set yourself up for failure. If you only saw it now, saw this webinar and thought, wow, I'm in this position, I need to get going. You might already be a tad bit late depending on the size of your entity. So you might want to get on that as of yesterday. We need to prioritize critical workloads. So identify areas that you feel will be most affected and highlight them as a case of we should do those first, then do the next second, and so forth and so forth. And then avoid the last minute rush. No one, and I mean probably no one, there might be a 1% on the planet that does, but no one enjoys being put on the spot, overwhelmed, pushing an undeemable deadline, and all your focus is now on this task, and things just feel like they're not getting anywhere because you're rushing, you're pushing, everyone's getting overworked, overstressed, and nothing's getting done. So the quicker you can begin, the easier your mind will be at ease, and the more you'll be able to focus on everything at once. And yeah, that's basically out with the classic, in with the modern. This is a portion we've dedicated for some Q&A. So if there's any questions you guys would like to ask, don't ask me why my computer crashed. I have no idea. Not even I can answer that. But if you have any questions on today's topic, feel free. I open the floor.
I think you answered my question. When it's too late.
Today.
Yeah, you answered my
Should have
question.
started yesterday.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So when does it normally, how long does it normally take? Say
What?
for the large users, the large amount.
Couple months.
Yo,
If I refer back to my last slide, completely dependent on speed of transfer, complexity of the environment. Could be a few months to several months, depends on what you're trying to achieve and how long, and how, if you're moving from on-prem to online, what sort of internet connectivity you have. Otherwise, if it's on-prem to on-prem, going from old to subscription edition, they've made that jump a lot easier, at least. So it's a little smoother than it used to be. But yeah, it's entirely dependent on the scenario and the situation.
you
If in-
guys, I said, did you ever have a scenario where they don't want the documents on SharePoint anymore?
Where they don't want it on there anymore.
Yeah, so they had a document library and they said, nah, they don't want to store it there anymore. How do you handle that migration? Do you still go ahead? Or does that include in the migration to maybe put it in Azure or something?
Yeah, our specialty is SharePoint, but we can facilitate Azure moves. We can facilitate. Let's use an example. I would assume an example would be like an archiving situation where you don't want it on SharePoint anymore, but you can't just delete it. We have several solutions that can move data from SharePoint to Azure, blob storage, file shares, anywhere like that. If it is a case of the client doesn't want to use SharePoint at all anymore, like they just find it not quite doing what they want it to do, We can assist, but once again, our specialty does lie with SharePoint. So if you're looking to move it elsewhere, we may be able to still assist, but we would very likely guide you towards a more suitable partner then. Hope that answers your questions.
And then another question is the licensing. I remember ShareGate used to charge every client a license. So I can't use because it was like a key that get registered in your on the machine somewhere. It's because that time you had to run it on the actual server.
ShareGate's still very much the same.
Didn't change.
Licensing structure is still the same. So you still need a dependent license if you want to do any migrations.
So that will always be included in the costing.
Correct.
Okay.
100%.
But if you don't want to pay the exorbitant fees, at ShareGate Partners, we do have licenses that allow us to help you with your migration.
A quick plug there. Thank you for that, Carl.
Plug.
Also, just in terms of migrating, if you're in that lucky situation where you are in SharePoint 2019 and you want to move over to SharePoint Subscription Edition, you're one of the lucky ones because that's one of the only paths that still allows you to do a database attach and upgrade migration for SharePoint on-premise.
Correct, which does beat the whole manual rebuild process by miles.
Oh, yes.
And it saves you a lot of cost, time, and frustration. If you are one of the unlucky ones sitting on 2013, for example, there's a little bit more involved than just a simple hop, skip, and a jump. Which again, if you wait for July 14th, you suddenly find yourself needing to upgrade from 2013, but you have to keep everything on-prem, and it means you want to go the subscription edition route. You're setting yourself in a situation where you need to build several farms. None of them are supported, only to get yourself to a supported level. So the risk is astronomical, not to mention the pain and suffering for the poor team that needs to do the building. But yeah, so as I said, waiting for D-Day is not the best move.
Another question.
Hey, Chad, the questionnaire today.
So back in the day, we used to create provider-hosted add-ins, which is applications that sits on SharePoint, but part of the SharePoint infrastructure. So provider-hosted add-in, you would have an app service in Azure, and that add-in would feed off that application that sits in Azure as app service, but it's still part of the infrastructure. Does ShareGate pick up that?
No.
That there is a
So, okay, so it entirely depends. ShareGate can only pick up what SharePoint can show, essentially. So it's not a one-stop pick up all solutions tool. It gives you all your SharePoint sites, web app solutions, workflows, etc. Anything that SharePoint is cognizant of, it will produce. But the caveat being that if it's custom or outside the standard parameters like farm-wide solutions or, well, custom farm solutions or anything that goes outside SharePoint, ShareGate won't be able to tell you that. But there are PowerShell alternatives that you can run that will highlight and pull those exact scenarios for you, which we are obviously equipped to pull the information for. Won't leave you in the lurch just because of a few custom solutions.
thanks. I
You're
think
welcome.
that is all I have.
I think you just about asked a question for at least one person each on this call. So I think you're
I do
carrying the
have
questionnaire.
I do have more.
Therefore, no questions on my side. Thanks, Jay.
Anyone else got any questions? Otherwise, I'm going to wrap it up here and have you guys go have an awesome afternoon.
Thanks, same to you guys.
Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Barend.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Barend.
Lindsay.
Thank you everyone for
Bye-bye.
attending.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.